My name is Catherine Davis, and I am the president of the Restoration Project. What you are about to see is a presentation I did in St. Louis, Missouri, where I answer the question, why did Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg say in a 2009 New York Times Magazine interview that Roe v. Wade was the case that was going to let us get rid of the populations we didn't want too many of? I hope you will find this video informative, and please stay tuned because I'll be back at the end to explain a little bit more. Thank you. Why are we here? Why is the Restoration Project buying you lunch today? It's to sound the alarm. A couple of years ago, I went to a women's conference in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the pastor was talking about the book of Judges and Deborah. And he made a statement. He said, there are many Baraks in the earth, but where are the Deborahs? And I heard in my spirit, activate the women. And I saw this event as a point of activation. And so I began to try to do what I thought the Lord told me to do, which was to activate the women. So I laid out this elaborate plan and had it all together and couldn't get any money to fund it. So I'm sitting in my bed, which is also my prayer closet, and I'm just crying. Lord, you told me to do these teas. Why don't I have the money? You're supposed to give me the money. And the Lord said, shut up and write a book. And I said, okay, what you want me to write the book about? And he said, answer the question, why did Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg say in her 2009 New York Times Magazine interview that Roe v. Wade was the case that was going to let us get rid of the populations we didn't want too many of? And so, in your bag, you have the book, The Fight for Life, Turning the Wounded into Warriors. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Let me just say that abortion has never been, ever been about a woman's right to choose. It has never been about choice. And it hasn't even been about women's rights, if we're honest with one another. It has always been about population control. And I'm going to show you why I believe that. The Supreme Court of the United States has been the most rights-denying entity in this country. You hear a lot of people talk about we need to get the right Supreme Court justice. We need to make sure that the Supreme Court justices believe a certain way, et cetera. And I'm going to submit to you that it is the Supreme Court, not the state legislatures, the Supreme Court who has denied people rights based on their skin color. So we're going to go all the way back to Dred Scott. Dred Scott was told that he was not a citizen of the United States, and as such, he didn't have standing to sue for his freedom. He was told, you can't be free, even though you're living in a state where it's illegal to own slaves, and you've been living there for years and years and years, you can't be free because your property, in essence, if we boil it all the way down, your property. And so the Supreme Court denied him the right to even sue for his freedom. So after that case, the Congress came back and authorized the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th Amendment said you have equal protection under the law. And the 15th Amendment said you have the right to vote. So the Supreme Court didn't feel that way. So they came back with Plessy versus Ferguson. And they said, you may be equal, but you're going to be separate. And separate but equal was the law of the land for 90 plus years after the constitutional amendments giving people rights based on the color of their skin. And not too long after they did the separate but equal doctrine, they also did the Buck v. Bell case. And in Buck v. Bell, they said, in 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. And so they allowed states to involuntarily sterilize people. About 60 plus thousand got sterilized under that program of eugenics. How many of you know what eugenics is? Eugenics says only certain people should be allowed to reproduce and others shouldn't. And one of the people that shouldn't be allowed to reproduce were black people. And they established that a state could legally make a woman or a man infertile, like my friend Elaine Reddick. Elaine is in the movie My Alpha 21. When she was 13 years old, the neighbor that she had raped her, and she ended up getting pregnant. The state of North Carolina said, well, Elaine, you are feeble-minded. You've never worked a day in your life. You're uneducated, and so we want to sterilize you. So they went to her grandmother, who was illiterate, and said, if you don't put your mark on this piece of paper, then we are going to take away your government benefits. And grandma, who couldn't read what she was signing, put her X down because she didn't want to lose her benefits. And when Elaine's son was born, they sterilized her. She was 14 years old. Elaine didn't know she had been sterilized until she was 19 years old, and she got married, and she wanted to have more children. And it was at that point she found out what the state of North Carolina did to her. And God bless Elaine. Elaine lives in Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm from. And Elaine fought the state of North Carolina. And in 2012, they set aside a pot of money to recompense those people that had been involuntarily sterilized. And it was because Elaine led the charge. So, as I said, that was the law of the land. Eugenics controlled certain people should be able to have children, certain people should not. That was the law of the land for 90 plus years. But then something began to happen, and we started hearing about Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat. And by the way, she wasn't the actual woman who refused to give up her seat first. It was a 14-year-old named Claudette Colvin, and she decided, I'm not giving up my seat. She was pregnant, but they couldn't use her because 1, she was a minor, 2, she was pregnant and a minor, and so the NAACP had Rosa Parks to refuse, and that was the case that got publicized. But long before Rosa Parks was Claudette, and she filed suit. And that case worked its way through the courts. And so you had Rosa Parks, you had Martin Luther King marching, you had John Lewis and them getting clocked on the head on the Pettus Bridge, but the culture was shifting away from treating people differently based on the color of their skin. The culture was no longer willing to tolerate that some people could drink out of this water fountain and these people couldn't. So we had the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and in 1965 we had the passage of the Voting Rights Act. But what was happening in the country was people like Alan Guttmacher, who was the president of Planned Parenthood during that time. He took over after Margaret Sanger. He was also the vice president of the American Eugenics Society at the same time that he was president of Planned Parenthood. And he went to Connecticut, my home state. I was born and raised in Stamford, Connecticut. he got the Planned Parenthood director of New Haven, Connecticut, to start giving birth control to women in violation of the law. At that time, in the 1950s, 1960s, in fact, it was since the 1800s, there was a law in this country called the Comstock Law, and the Comstock Law prohibited any doctor from giving birth control to a woman. It was considered immoral, it was considered indecent, and they would get prosecuted federally if they prescribed birth control to a woman. Alan Guttmacher had Estelle Griswold, who was the president of the Planned Parenthood in New Haven, Connecticut, and the medical director there to start giving birth control to married women. And they made sure that the police knew what they were doing. They wanted to challenge the Comstock Law, and the only way they could do it was violate it, and that's what happened. So Griswold worked its way up through to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court for the first time ruled that a woman had a penumbra of privacy. Remember that phrase, penumbra of privacy over her womb, and she could determine what she was going to do with her body. She was a married woman. If she wanted to contracept, she should be able to. So they struck down that portion of the Comstock Law as it related to married couples. Well, in between then, 1965 and 1972, we had the sexual revolution, burn your bra, make love, not war, all of that happening. And in 1972, we then got Eisenstadt v. Baird, which said single women have a penumbra of privacy over their wombs. And so they should be able to determine what they were going to do with their bodies. In 1969, there was a memo created by Planned Parenthood World, and that memo outlined the very steps that they wanted the eugenics boards to take in terms of controlling the population. And they said things like, we're going to encourage homosexuality. We're going to work to penalize, families, women that work. We want to encourage women to work, and if they don't, we're going to penalize them, maybe tax them a little bit more. They said, we want to have birth control available on demand. So do you know in some communities, a 12-year-old could walk into a pharmacy anywhere and get Plan B or the morning after pill or Ella? They don't need a prescription. They don't need parental consent. Missouri is a parental consent state. But of course, they have found ways to get around that by the judicial bypass. And I just learned seconds ago, sitting at my table, that even Planned Parenthood will partner with that minor and be a friend of the minor and give permission for her to get an abortion without parental knowledge or consent, in violation of the laws of the state of Missouri. So they laid out a very detailed plan on how they hope to move the culture towards abortion on demand. At the same time that we had Planned Parenthood World laying out this strategy, we had Richard Nixon as the president of the United States. Richard Nixon was a population control addict. He was as racist as anyone that you would ever call racist. Now, he was a real racist. It ain't like today when we say everybody that looks at a black person wrong is racist. No, he was racist. And he recorded many of his conversations that he had with his staff in his office. And he said things like, I know Michigan's going to vote for it. I know Colorado's going to vote for abortion because they know that what's going to be aborted are the little black bastards. He said, you know, it's about population control. People in our class, we control how many children we have, but they don't. It's population control. And whoever he's talking to goes, yeah, sure. And so he set up Population Control Council under John D. Rockefeller. It was Richard Nixon who opened up the Office of Population Affairs under the government that funds Title X so that abortion is one of the primary forms of family planning that gets promoted. It was all about abortion and using abortion as a tool to control the populations we don't want too many of. In fact, in 1973, when Roe v. Wade was decided, the president of the American Eugenics Society said, birth control and abortion are going to be the greatest eugenic advances of our day. And they weren't lying. So by 1973, the culture was set up to accept the penumbra of privacy that a woman had over her uterus. Now, prior to writing this book, I had read Roe v. Wade, I can't tell you, countless times, and I never saw this sentence until God revealed it to me as I was writing the book. In the third paragraph of the decision, Justice Blackmun said something to the effect of poverty, racial overtones, and population were going to complicate the question of abortion. He didn't relate that sentence to anything that came before it, nor anything that came after it. Why is that sentence there? Because Norma McCorvey, who is the Roe in Roe v. Wade, she was Caucasian. Doe v. Bolton was a companion case to Roe v. Wade that removed the restriction. Many people think you can't get an abortion after the first trimester. That's not true. In some states, if your state has not regulated it, you could be in labor, getting ready to deliver that child, and if your doctor is an abortionist, you could raise your hand and say, I don't want it, I want to kill it, and that doctor could legally kill it even though you were at 9 months on the delivery table. And so Doe v. Bolton that set that up was Sandra Cano. Sandra Cano didn't even want an abortion. She went to her attorney to get a divorce, but they used her because she was pregnant at the time to say, you should not have any restrictions on when a woman could decide to abort her child. Sandra Cano died in 2014, I think it was. And with her dying breath, she fought Doe v. Bolton and tried to get the Supreme Court to overturn it because it was based on fraud. So in 1939, Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger launched something that she called the Negro Project. She and Clarence Gamble of the Procter & Gamble fortune launched the Negro Project to control the black birth rate. They called it by name. It's the only group that they named. There's no Caucasian project, there's no Asian project, there's just a Negro Project. And the idea of the Negro Project was to pay black leaders, physicians, ministers to teach birth control at that time from the pulpit. And they had men like W.E.B. Du Bois. You know, how many of you heard of the Talented 10? W.E.B. Du Bois believed that black people, only the top 10% of the black community should be able to reproduce because that's where we would get our leaders. And it was a direct result of the Negro Project. So what is Planned Parenthood's mission today? They will tell you that the Negro Project you know, that Margaret Sanger had a complicated history. It was complicated, you know. In the times, they believed in eugenics, but you know, we like black people today. In their 2008-2009 tax filing, they told you exactly what their mission is. Any nonprofit organization has to file what's called the 990, where you tell the government how you spent the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And let me just say, Planned Parenthood gets $500 million, with a B, taxpayer dollars each and every year. And they told us in that tax filing that their mission was to achieve a population of optimum size. Planned Parenthood surgical facilities are primarily in communities of color. In 2012, Protecting Black Life, an organization out of Cincinnati, Ohio, did a study to verify, was Planned Parenthood targeting the black community or weren't there? There had been studies before this that were based on zip code data, but this organization looked at census tract data. Who's living in the census tracts where the Planned Parenthoods are located? What they found was that 79% of Planned Parenthood surgical facilities are within a 2-mile walking radius of a black or Latino neighborhood. The red dots are Latino, the blue dots are blacks. And usually they're near a college, because that's where the women of childbearing age. And understand something, 3% of the United States population, those are women of childbearing age, 3% of the women of childbearing age get 37% of the abortions. That's black women get 37%. And I believe it's because they're luring us into their facilities. Not only are they luring us into them, they're building them bigger and bigger and bigger. Planned Parenthood has constructed 25 mega abortuaries, and by mega I mean 10,000 square feet or larger. 24 of the 25 are within a 2-mile walking radius of a black or Latino neighborhood. The second largest abortion facility in the world, not just in the United States, in the world, is in Houston, Texas. It is in the heart of the black Latino community, and it is near a historically black college. In 1987, I think it is, President Reagan signed into law something called the Proxmire Act. The Proxmire Act defines genocide. It was America's ratification of the UN Convention on Genocide. And the law is very specific that anyone who is seeking in whole or in part to destroy a racial group, a religious group, etc., would be guilty of genocide. If you look at the definition, one of them is that you cause serious bodily injury to a person. Well, if you go into any of these Planned Parenthoods, you are literally putting your life at risk, especially the Planned Parenthood here in St. Louis. Roberta Clark wanted to have an abortion, but she wanted to be sedated. As she went to a Planned Parenthood, and they were having problems putting the IV in. And it got to the point that she said, look, stop, never mind, I don't want to do it, just forget about it. And the doctor refused to stop, and even though she was not sedated, they did the abortion anyway on her, even though she was not sedated. Come to find out, Roberta Clark had an ectopic pregnancy, meaning that the baby wasn't in her uterus, it was in her tube. And so they really didn't do an abortion on her, and even the fetal tissue that they were required to send to the lab for the state proved there was no fetal tissue in there. They sent Ayanna home, and a few weeks later, she had such complications, she had to go to the emergency room, and that's when they found out that she was still pregnant, and the ectopic pregnancy had ruptured. If you put together conditions of life that are designed to destroy the group in whole or in part, that is one of the prongs of genocide. Well, all around the country, these Planned Parenthoods are putting women at risk, and then they cover it up. And they lie, and they manipulate, and they deceive. So like in Mobile, Alabama, a 14-year-old girl was being molested by somebody. We don't know who. She presented at Planned Parenthood twice within a 4-month period, and they gave her an abortion, did not notify anybody, and whoever brought her there to get the abortion sent her home with them. Now, the young lady already had 2 children at home. So whoever was molesting her was repeatedly impregnating her, and then Planned Parenthood was happy to oblige and terminate the pregnancy. They never reported it to the state. They never told them of the child molestation. In Denver, Colorado, another young lady was being molested by her stepfather. He took her to the Planned Parenthood in Denver and said, do the abortion. And after they did the abortion, he said, well, now give her something because I don't want to have to keep bringing her back here. So they gave her a Depo-Provera shot. Now, the girl was terrified of needles. So when they did the Depo-Provera shot, it just messed with her head terribly. Depo-Provera is particularly bad form of birth control, especially for Black women, and it reduces your resistance to AIDS and is connected directly with HIV. And they gave that child the Depo-Provera shot and sent her home. Even though she never called the man dad, she called him Tim by his name. You know, she never held out that this was her father. They never asked. So he takes her back home and continues molesting her. Well, eventually mom finds out, and when mom finds out, she goes into mommy mode, and she has him arrested, he gets prosecuted and convicted, and then she filed suit against Planned Parenthood because they broke the laws of the state. Now I want you to note that the state didn't do anything. Mom had to take care of it. And this Planned Parenthood here just sent their 65th patient to the hospital from that facility. Most of those were in 2016. So they are growing worse and worse and worse with injuring women to the point that they need emergency care. Now, I love your governor. He is fighting, and I want to say this is an apolitical fight. I'm not promoting any particular party over any other particular party. But what I am saying is that this governor is taking steps to protect women in the state of Missouri, particularly in St. Louis. How many of you know what a sanctuary city is for abortion? See, very few of you. The city of St. Louis passed a law that made having an abortion equal to being Black. And they said you cannot discriminate against someone if they had an abortion. You can't deny them employment, you can't deny them housing, etc. Now, what that means for you as first ladies and members of your churches is if a post-abortive woman presents at your door and wants to be the pastor over your youth ministry, and she is currently sexually active and your ministry teaches abstinence until you get married, and so you don't choose her to be your youth pastor because she's sexually active and violating the tenets of faith of your church, under the St. Louis law, you could be held accountable legally for breaking that law within the city of St. Louis. So Governor Greitens has called a special session of the legislature to call them back to get them to address that issue legislatively from the state level. He's trying to stop that from being in effect in St. Louis. Because who's going around asking, did you have an abortion? Nobody. And most women aren't like me. They're not going to tell you that they're post-abortive. They're not going to tell you that they drank the Kool-Aid. I was one that drank the Kool-Aid. And I had 2 abortions. And in my second abortion, I heard the doctor counting my baby's body parts. And I was like Scarlett O'Hara. I'll think about that tomorrow. Until the day came that I went to a Bible study at a church in Richmond, Virginia, on the corner of Broad and Belvedere Streets. And the topic of the noonday luncheon Bible study was abortion. Had I known that before I went in there, I probably wouldn't have gone. But I went, and I got paralyzed in my guilt. And those men of God recognized that's one right there. And one of them got on one side of me, and the other one got on the other side of me, and they laid hands on me, and they prayed until they got the release. And when they felt like I understood that I was forgiven and whole and set free, then they put a book in my hand, Grand Illusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood. And they said, read this and go do something about it. That was 30 plus years ago. And I've been fighting abortion ever since. But we need more to stand up. There are women sitting in your congregation today who are quietly hurting. You are going to hear in a few minutes some of the side effects that abortion has. You're going to hear about the depression and the physical consequences, the mental consequences. And you're going to hear about that. And you'll understand why maybe some of the women in your congregation are acting as crazy as they're acting. It's because they can't tell anybody. And they're hurting. And so we want to create a safe path so that they could get healed. Cecile Richards, on March 6, 2017, informed America when President Trump asked Planned Parenthood, because there is a move to defund Planned Parenthood, to take away that $500 million taxpayer dollars from them. And President Trump went to Cecile Richards and said, if you will stop doing abortions, you can keep your federal money. And Cecile Richards came back and said, Planned Parenthood is proud to provide abortion, a necessary service that's as vital to our mission as birth control or cancer screenings. So let's go back a couple of screens. What is their mission? To achieve a population of optimum size. That is why Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, Roe was the case that's going to let us get rid of the populations we don't want too many of. And what they don't tell you is that women are dying. Every time you see a video or a film that's talking about abortion and Planned Parenthood, you will see these women in their pink t-shirts and they're holding up their hangers. We will not go back. We won't go back, right? And they're not telling you that Planned Parenthood is killing women today inside of their abortion facilities. Adrika Good was in Riverside, California, and she had an infection. And she presented to the Planned Parenthood there for an abortion, and they initially sent her home and told her she could not have the abortion because she had an infection and she needed to clear the infection up before they could do it. She waited a week and went back. They didn't ask her, did you clear the infection up? Did you get any antibiotics? They didn't ask her anything. They did the abortion. They began the abortion. Adrika was 5 months pregnant. So she was having what's considered to be a late-term abortion. That typically is a 2-day procedure. On day 1, they put something called laminaria in you to open up your uterus. They put the laminaria in her, and when they did, it caused sepsis, and the infection raged through her body. Her mother took her to the hospital and said, "Help my daughter." The infection was so rampant that literally Adrika was out of her mind. They realized that she had the laminaria in her, and so her mother said, "Take it out, help her." And they would not do it because Adrika would not consent. Adrika was out of her mind. She couldn't consent. And Adrika died. In 2012, Tanya Reeves went to Planned Parenthood at 18 South of Michigan Avenue in Chicago, Illinois. She was 5 months pregnant. The abortionist, Mandy Gittler, performed the abortion, and they came back and they kept pressing her stomach and said, "Oh, her uterus is boggy." And what that meant was she was bleeding in her uterus. So Mandy does not send her down the street to the hospital. Mandy goes next door, performs another abortion, comes back, she's still boggy. Mandy scrapes her uterus again. Goes next door, does a few more abortions, come back, she's still boggy. By now, 5.5 hours have gone by. And Tanya was laying there bleeding the entire time. So they finally took her the less than 3 miles down the road to the nearest trauma center. And understand something, Mandy didn't have admitting privileges to the hospital. So the hospital basically had to start from scratch trying to figure out what is going on with her, what's happening. And that's why you want these doctors to have admitting privileges. They did not figure out initially what was going on. They finally did an ultrasound, found out she still had parts of the baby in her. So then they went and they completed the abortion. However, what they didn't see was that her uterus had been perforated. So after they completed the abortion, she's still bleeding, and they're like, what in the world's going on? And now they do a more in-depth test, find out there's a hole in her uterus. They go to do the hysterectomy, too little, too late, and she died. The last young lady I'm going to talk to you about is Cree Irwin. Cree haunts me. I know Cree's mom. Cree died a torturous death in Battle Creek, Michigan. She had gone to the Planned Parenthood in Kalamazoo. They performed a surgical procedure, which we didn't find out that it was a surgical abortion until about 3 months ago. She died on the 4th of July last year. And the medical examiner held the autopsy report for 8 months before they released the autopsy report. And what we find out is Cree had gone to her mother's house and said, "I am in pain." And she was in such pain that mom said, "Okay, we're going to the hospital." So mom takes her to the emergency room. That's when mom finds out she had an abortion. The hospital determined that Cree still had parts of the baby in her. but they didn't complete the abortion. They sent Cree home with a pain med and said, go see Planned Parenthood on the Tuesday after the 4th of July, or go see your own doctor. And Cree died in her mother's bed on the 4th of July. Abortion is killing us. It's killing our babies, and it's killing us. So there are penalties for Planned Parenthood violating the Proxmire Act. But the problem is nobody believes that it's genocide because they say the women, nobody's holding a gun to the head and making the women go in there, right? But if 79% of their surgical facilities are within walking distance of their neighborhood, and if when they walk in the door, the only option that they hear about is abortion, and they never tell them any of the side effects that could happen to them, is that really choice? Are they really choosing? If they knew all of the consequences, if I knew that I had increased my risk for breast cancer, my mom died from breast cancer. I just told you I had 2 abortions. I had no idea that I was putting myself at risk to die as my mother did. And it's only the grace of God that I'm still here, that I didn't die from the procedure. If women knew that and still went in there, then maybe you could say it was choice. But is it choice when they don't give you all the information? Is it choice when they will discount your abortion, or they'll tell you, we have a fund, just come see us, we'll pay for it? And you have people like George Soros, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates giving them money to pay for those abortions on those women of color. Is that really choice? So we need to sound the alarm. In Judges 5:7, it says that there were few people left in Israel until Deborah arose as a mother. And that's what I want to invite you today. Will you be a mother? Because we are ceasing. In New York City today, more black babies are aborted than are born alive. In 2012, for every 1,000 black babies born alive in New York City, 1,489 were aborted. That's genocide. We need some Deborahs. And I am hoping that you will be a Deborah. I am going to give you a card. If you are willing to be a Deborah, I want to ask you to fill out the card and return it to me so that I can add you to the growing list of women who are going to take a stand for life. In 2013, there was a horrible abortionist in Pennsylvania by the name of Kermit Gosnell. Anybody ever hear of him? He's the biggest serial killer in this country. He killed hundreds upon hundreds of babies in his filthy abortuary. I mean, it was so bad. His place was so filthy that the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, were raiding him because he was running a pill mill. And they went in there, and the smell and the condition of the facility caused them to come out there and call the Pennsylvania Health Department and say, y'all need to come do something about this. That was the only way that this man got shut down from killing little black babies. And he was collecting their feet in jars that lined his abortuary. He's an evil, evil man. But before he started legally doing abortions, he and a man named Harvey Carman did illegal abortions on women. And in 1972, he had 15 black women bused from Chicago to Pennsylvania. All 15 were pregnant. And he had something that they called a super coil. And he inserted that super coil into the uteruses of the 15 women. When their body temperature heated up, the supercoil melted, the gel melted, and razor blade-like objects came out. And they thought that was going to be a new method for doing abortions. Kermit Gosnell never served a day of time. He fled the country and went to the Bahamas and hung out in the Bahamas until after everything died down in Pennsylvania. And then he came back to the United States. And when he came back, abortion was legal. And he opened up his clinic in the heart of the Black community in Philadelphia. So we need some Deborahs to shout loud, blow a trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm, and tell other women that this is not safe, it's not healthy, and we've been targeted. And I hope you will join me. Thank you so much, ladies, again. I hope you found this presentation informative, and I want to invite you to join me May 15th, 2018 in Washington, D.C. as we petition Congress to provide equal protection from Planned Parenthood's targeting of communities of color. If you want to reach out to me, here's my contact information. Thank you.